The perfect storm. Josephine Winters ran her gloved hands over the canvas with practiced precision, her magnifying headset revealing the microscopic cracks in a 19th century oil painting that most people would never notice. The conservation lab at the Westbrook Museum of Fine Arts was silent, save for the soft classical music playing in the background, a ritual that helped her concentrate on the delicate work of preserving history. "You've been at it for 6 hours. Straight," said Dominic, her assistant, setting down a cup of tea beside her workstation. "Even art preservationists need to preserve themselves." Josephine smiled without looking up. "Just another 30 minutes. This section is crucial. The pigment is flaking in a pattern I haven't seen before." Her phone buzzed with a text from her husband Gregory. "Working late again. Don't wait up." 15 years of marriage to a corporate attorney had accustomed her to nights alone, but lately the frequency had increased. Gregory Winters had recently made partner at Caldwell & Barnes, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. His specialty in intellectual property law had brought them financial comfort, enabling them to purchase their Victorian home in the historic district, and allowing Josephine to pursue her passion for art conservation even when the pay was modest. "Perfect timing," she murmured, setting down her tools. "I should head home anyway." The drive home through the autumn rain felt longer than usual. Their neighborhood of century-old homes with wraparound porches looked particularly melancholic in the downpour. Josephine pulled into the driveway, noticing the house was completely dark except for the porch light she'd left on that morning. Inside, she wandered through the quiet rooms, fingers trailing along the antique furniture they'd collected over years of weekend antiquing trips. Photographs from their travels adorned the walls. Gregory and Josephine in Paris, Rome, Barcelona. The images captured what she had believed was a partnership built on shared ambitions and mutual respect. The first hint of trouble had come 3 months ago at the annual hospital charity gala. Gregory had been unusually animated while talking with Vanessa Mercer, a pharmaceutical representative who had recently transferred to their city. With her tailored clothing and confident demeanor, Vanessa commanded attention in any room. Josephine had dismissed her initial discomfort as irrational jealousy. That night, Josephine poured herself a glass of wine and curled up on the window seat overlooking their garden. The rain intensified, drumming against the glass like an urgent message. Her phone chimed with an email notification. The sender was unfamiliar. vmerceripharmacorp.net. "Josephine, I believe you deserve to know the truth about Gregory. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. He plans to leave you. I'm sorry you're learning this way, but he's been too cowardly to tell you himself." Attached were photographs of Gregory and Vanessa together, entering a hotel, intimate dinners, holding hands in a park Josephine didn't recognize. The timestamps spanned months. Her hands trembling, Josephine called Gregory's office. His secretary sounded surprised. "Mr. Winters left early today, around 3. He mentioned personal matters." The next morning, Gregory returned home with rehearsed apologies and vague explanations about work pressure and emotional distance in their marriage. When Josephine confronted him with the email evidence, his demeanor shifted from contrition to cold calculation. "I didn't want it to happen this way," he said, loosening his tie. "But since it's out in the open, yes, Vanessa and I are in love. I want a divorce, Josephine. I've already spoken with Thomas Sullivan. He'll be handling my case." Sullivan was known as the butcher in legal circles, a divorce attorney who specialized in leaving spouses with nothing. "You're having me represented by a colleague from your own firm?" Josephine asked incredulously. "Former colleague," Gregory corrected. "And I've already had the paperwork drawn up. You should find your own attorney." As Gregory outlined his terms, he would keep the house, most of their assets, and demanded a significant portion of her family inheritance. Josephine realized this wasn't an impulsive decision. This had been calculated perhaps for months. The perfect storm had been brewing all along. She simply hadn't seen the clouds gathering on the horizon. Fractured canvas, the conference room at Blackwood & Associates felt austere and unwelcoming. with its polished mahogany table reflecting the grey autumn light filtering through vertical blinds. Josephine sat beside her attorney, Patricia Fernandez, a former prosecutor who had pivoted to family law after 20 years of putting away white-collar criminals. "They're deliberately late," Patricia murmured, checking her watch. "It's a power play." When Gregory finally entered, accompanied by Thomas Sullivan and, surprisingly, Vanessa Mercer, Josephine felt her chest tighten. Gregory had always been handsome in a conventional way, athletic build maintained by regular tennis matches, sandy hair precisely cut every 3 weeks, blue eyes that could charm museum donors into opening their checkbooks. Today, he wore the same expression she'd seen him use in mock trials, detached confidence with a hint of practiced sympathy. "Ms. Mercer is here as a material witness," Sullivan announced, before anyone could object. "Her testimony is relevant to the distribution of assets." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of her surprise. "Interesting. And what exactly will Ms. Mercer be testifying about?" Vanessa straightened the cuffs of her tailored blazer. "Professional misconduct, unfortunately." Gregory slid a folder across the table. "We have evidence that Josephine has been systematically stealing from the museum for years. Small items, primarily. Valuable ones that wouldn't be immediately noticed missing. Some were sold, others are hidden in storage units." Josephine felt the blood drain from her face. "That's completely false. We have documentation," Sullivan continued smoothly. "Inventory discrepancies, suspicious deposits to accounts in Josephine's name, and witness statements from museum staff." Patricia opened the folder, scanning its contents with an impassive expression honed from years in courtrooms. "And how did you come by this information, Mr. Winters?" "Vanessa has a cousin who works in the museum's administrative office," Gregory replied. "She noticed irregularities and brought them to our attention out of concern. The accusation was absurd, but Josephine recognized the strategy. Gregory was attacking her professional reputation, the foundation of her identity. If he succeeded, she would lose not just her marriage, but her career and standing in the conservation community she had worked decades to build. "This changes our negotiating position," Sullivan declared. "Given the potential for criminal charges, Mrs. Winters should consider herself fortunate if she walks away with her freedom, let alone any assets." Patricia closed the folder with deliberate calm. "We'll need time to review these allegations." Outside, rain pelted the sidewalk as they hurried to Patricia's car. "They're bluffing," Josephine insisted, her voice unsteady. "I've dedicated my life to preserving artwork, not stealing it." Patricia started the engine, her expression grave. "Bluffing or not, they've escalated this beyond a simple divorce. These accusations could trigger a criminal investigation. The next week unfolded in a blur of legal consultations and sleepless nights. Forced to take a leave of absence from the museum pending investigation, Josephine moved into a sparsely furnished apartment paid for by liquidating her retirement account, the only funds Gregory hadn't managed to freeze. The museum's director, Eleanor Hammond, had been supportive but cautious. "I know your work, Josephine, but the board is concerned about the documentation they've received." "Documentation that's completely fabricated," Josephine replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. Eleanor's expression softened. "For what it's worth, I've commissioned an independent inventory audit. But these things take time." Time was precisely what Josephine lacked. Gregory had accelerated the divorce proceedings, citing the need to resolve matters before further evidence of misconduct emerges. Late one evening, Patricia called with troubling news. "They've added new claims. According to their filing, you've been systematically overcharging private clients for conservation work and pocketing the difference. They have copies of invoices and altered payment records." Josephine sank onto her temporary bed, the springs protesting beneath her weight. "That's impossible. I don't even handle the billing for private clients. That goes through the museum's finance department. Someone with access to those systems is helping them," Patricia observed. "And they're doing a thorough job of it." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. As Josephine prepared a detailed record of her work history to counter the allegations, she discovered that her professional email had been accessed remotely multiple times in recent months. The museum's IT department confirmed the breach, but couldn't identify the source. "Someone's been watching me for a long time," she told Patricia during their preparation session. "Building this case piece by piece." Patricia nodded grimly. "And they've been careful. The evidence looks convincing. Fabricated records that would fool anyone who doesn't know your work intimately." On the morning of the hearing, Josephine stood before her bathroom mirror, hardly recognizing the woman reflected there. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she had lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely from her frame. The confident conservator who could detect a forged brushstroke at 20 paces now questioned everything around her as she fastened her mother's pearl earrings, perhaps the last valuable possession not yet targeted in the proceedings. Josephine made a decision. She would not be a passive victim in the destruction of her life. Gregory and Vanessa had orchestrated this campaign meticulously, but even the most carefully constructed forgeries contained tells, inconsistencies that revealed their true nature. She just needed to find them. In the courthouse corridor, Josephine caught sight of Gregory and Vanessa standing close together, reviewing documents. For a brief moment, Vanessa glanced up, meeting Josephine's gaze. Instead of triumph or hostility, Josephine saw something unexpected flash across the other woman's face. Fear. The silent witness. Raymond Okafor's office resembled an archaeological excavation more than a legal practice. Stacks of documents created a paper topography across every surface, with narrow pathways carved between them. The attorney himself sat behind a desk buried under accordion folders, his rectangular glasses perched on the end of his nose as he studied Josephine's file. "Patricia Fernandez is an excellent attorney," he said, finally looking up. "Why the change in representation?" Josephine shifted in her chair. "I need someone who thinks differently. The conventional approach isn't working against Gregory and Sullivan." Raymond nodded thoughtfully. Known for his unorthodox methods and encyclopedic knowledge of financial forensics, he had built a reputation taking cases other lawyers deemed hopeless. "Your husband and his mistress have constructed an elaborate narrative," Raymond observed, flipping through the evidence presented against Josephine. "These financial records are meticulous, almost too perfect." "That's what I've been saying," Josephine leaned forward. "In my work, the most convincing forgeries often contain subtle inconsistencies that only experts notice. There must be something similar here." Raymond removed his glasses, polishing them with his handkerchief. "The records showing your alleged thefts go back 3 years. Was there any change in your relationship with your husband during that time?" Josephine considered the question. "Gregory became more distant about 2 years ago. I attributed it to work pressure. He was pursuing the partnership. And when did he meet Ms. Mercer?" "Officially at the hospital gala 3 months ago. But based on the photos she sent me, they've been involved for at least 6 months. Raymond replaced his glasses, making a notation. "So the alleged criminal activity predates their relationship. Interesting." For the next week, Raymond and his assistant Bettina pored over financial statements, museum inventory records and communication logs. Josephine provided every professional document she could access, despite her suspended status. "We need to look beyond what they've presented," Raymond explained during a late-night strategy session. "Their narrative is that you've been systematically stealing and selling artifacts. If true, the money would have gone somewhere." Bettina, a former forensic accountant, tapped her pen against her notepad. "We've reviewed every account in Josephine's name. Nothing suspicious." "What about accounts not in my name?" Josephine suggested. Raymond's eyes lit up. "Exactly. Sullivan presented bank statements showing deposits to accounts supposedly controlled by you. We need the full records for those accounts, not just the cherry-picked transactions they've shown. Through legal discovery, they obtained complete records for the suspicious accounts. The bank's documentation revealed something crucial. The accounts had been opened using Josephine's personal information. But the security questions and recovery email were different from her standard ones. Identity theft, Raymond declared. Someone created these accounts in your name, but maintained control of them. But who? Josephine asked, though she already suspected the answer. Bettina cross-referenced the recovery email with public records. The email address is registered to a shell company called VM Enterprise LLC, incorporated 18 months ago. Josephine exhaled slowly. VM Vanessa Mercer. We're getting closer, Raymond cautioned, but this isn't enough. We need to connect Gregory to this as well and prove they fabricated the museum theft allegations. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reorganizing evidence boxes, Josephine noticed something about the supposedly incriminating museum invoices. These document reference numbers, she said, pointing to the corner of several pages. The museum changed its cataloging system last year during a database upgrade. These older documents shouldn't have the new format. Raymond immediately grasped the significance. They created these recently, but backdated them. A small detail, but crucial. Armed with this insight, they subpoenaed the museum's complete digital records. The metadata revealed that dozens of inventory entries had been modified within the past 3 months, all from a specific administrative account. Whose account is this? Raymond asked, pointing to the user ID. Louisa Palmer, Josephine replied. She works in administration. Then realization dawned. Vanessa mentioned her cousin works at the museum. Could it be Louisa? A background check confirmed it. Louisa Palmer and Vanessa Mercer were indeed cousins. The final piece fell into place when Raymond discovered a hidden pattern in the financial transactions. The accounts ostensibly showing Josephine's illegal proceeds regularly transferred funds to offshore accounts, which eventually circled back to a property investment company. Who owns this company? Josephine asked. On paper, a trust in the Cayman Islands, Bettina replied. But we found a connection through their corporate filings. The trust's legal representative is a former classmate of your husband's from law school. Raymond carefully arranged the evidence they'd gathered. They've been siphoning funds for nearly 2 years, likely setting up their new life together. The accusations against you were meant to discredit any defense you might mount and justify Gregory taking everything in the divorce. Josephine stared at the documentation before her, the silent witness to the elaborate scheme constructed against her. Will it be enough? Raymond's expression was resolute. In my experience, even the most carefully constructed deception has a weak point. They were clever, but they made one critical mistake. What's that? They underestimated you, Raymond said simply. And they assumed no one would look closely enough at their evidence. Judge Montgomery is known for her thoroughness. Once we present this, all of it, they won't know what hit them. That night, Josephine slept soundly for the first time in months. The path ahead remained difficult, but the truth had finally begun to emerge from the shadows. In her dream, she stood in the museum conservation lab, carefully removing layers of darkened varnish from an old painting, gradually revealing the authentic masterpiece that had been hidden beneath. The unraveling thread courtroom 4B of the County Superior Court fell silent as Judge Evelyn Montgomery entered. Known for her penetrating intelligence and zero tolerance for legal theatrics, Montgomery had been presiding over divorce proceedings for 2 decades. Her steel-grey hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her expression revealed nothing as she reviewed the day's docket. Winters versus Winters, she announced. I understand there are new developments in this case. Thomas Sullivan rose first, adjusting his Italian silk tie. Your Honor, as previously established, this divorce involves significant misconduct by the respondent. We've provided extensive documentation of Mrs. Winter's professional improprieties and financial malfeasance. Judge Montgomery's gaze shifted to Raymond Okafor, who stood unhurriedly. Mr. Okafor, you've requested today's hearing. I presume you have something substantial to add. Indeed, Your Honor. Raymond placed a single folder on the table before him. We've discovered evidence of systematic fraud and perjury that fundamentally changes the nature of these proceedings. Sullivan scoffed audibly. Desperate counterclaims from a desperate client. Counsel, Judge Montgomery warned sharply. You'll have your opportunity to respond. Mr. Okafor, proceed. Raymond approached the bench, handing the judge a bound presentation. Your Honor, what follows is evidence of a calculated conspiracy to defraud both Mrs. Winters and this court. For the next 40 minutes, Raymond methodically laid out their findings. He began with the fraudulent accounts created in Josephine's name, presenting bank records and cybersecurity expert testimony, confirming their creation dates and the recovery email connection to Vanessa Mercer. Furthermore, Raymond continued, Ms. Mercer's cousin, Louisa Palmer, used her position at the museum to alter digital records. He displayed the metadata analysis, showing the timestamp and user information for each modification. Furthermore, Raymond continued, Ms. Mercer's cousin, Louisa Palmer, used her position at the museum to alter digital records. He displayed the metadata analysis, showing the timestamp and user information for each modification. From the gallery, Josephine watched Gregory's expression shift from dismissive confidence to growing unease as Raymond connected the dots between the fabricated museum records and the offshore accounts that ultimately benefited Gregory's investment trust. This was never about a man leaving his wife for another woman, Raymond explained, his voice calm but resolute. This was a calculated financial scheme that required discrediting Mrs. Winters to prevent her from discovering the truth. Sullivan was on his feet immediately. These are wild accusations without merit. My client has been transparent throughout these proceedings. Has he? Raymond countered, withdrawing a final document. We've subpoenaed Mr. Winters's private communications with his financial advisor. In this email from 14 months ago, he explicitly discusses creating a narrative of professional misconduct to ensure a favorable divorce settlement. Gregory leaned urgently toward Sullivan, whispering frantically. Across the courtroom, Vanessa Mercer had gone pale, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her designer handbag. Judge Montgomery studied the evidence with methodical attention. Mr. Sullivan, does your client wish to respond to these allegations? Sullivan conferred briefly with Gregory before straightening. Your Honor, while we dispute certain characterizations presented today, we would like to request a brief recess to review this new information. Denied, Montgomery replied flatly. Mr. Winters, please approach the stand. You'll answer for these allegations under oath. What followed was a masterclass in judicial interrogation. Judge Montgomery questioned Gregory directly, confronting him with specific inconsistencies in his previous testimony. With each evasive answer, his credibility visibly eroded. Did you create or direct the creation of false financial records in your wife's name? Montgomery asked bluntly. Gregory glanced at Sullivan, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I may have been overzealous in gathering evidence, Your Honor, but my concerns about my wife's activities were genuine. That's not what I asked, Mr. Winters. Did you fabricate evidence to present to this court? The silence stretched for several uncomfortable seconds before Gregory finally murmured, I might have mischaracterized certain transactions. From her seat beside Raymond, Josephine watched the man she had spent 15 years with transform from the confident attorney into a cornered defendant. There was no satisfaction in the moment, only a profound sadness for the life they might have had. The judge turned her attention to Vanessa Mercer next. Ms. Mercer, are you aware that conspiring to commit fraud against the court is a felony offense? Color drained from Vanessa's face. And I was only following Gregory's guidance. He said this was standard procedure in high-asset divorces. Throwing your paramour under the bus already? Montgomery observed dryly. Mr. Sullivan, does your client wish to continue with these proceedings as currently structured, or would he prefer to withdraw his claims and renegotiate? Sullivan, visibly rattled, requested a brief conference with his client. After tense whispers, he addressed the court. Your Honor, in light of today's developments, my client is willing to withdraw certain claims and proceed with a more equitable division of assets. That opportunity has passed, Judge Montgomery declared. This court does not reward perjury and fraud with negotiation privileges. I am referring this matter for criminal investigation. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for my ruling on the divorce settlement. As the courtroom emptied, Josephine remained seated, processing the events. Raymond gently touched her shoulder. It's over, Josephine. You've won. She looked up at him, her expression complex. Have I? I've lost 15 years, my home, and my sense of security. But not your reputation or your future, Raymond reminded her. Some victories don't feel triumphant immediately. As they gathered their materials, Josephine noticed Gregory lingering by the door, his expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met across the courtroom, a silent acknowledgement of an ending neither had envisioned when they'd exchanged vows in a flower-filled church all those years ago. Restoration Spring arrived with a gentle persistence, coaxing new growth from winter-dormant gardens. 6 months had passed since Judge Montgomery's ruling, which had awarded Josephine the house, all joint assets, and substantial punitive damages. Gregory and Vanessa both faced legal consequences for their actions. He had been disbarred and was serving community service while awaiting trial for fraud. She had negotiated a plea deal in exchange for testimony about their scheme. Josephine stood in the conservation lab of the Westbrook Museum, carefully applying a stabilizing solution to the damaged edge of a Renaissance-era painting. The museum board had not only reinstated her with full apologies, but had created a new position for her as Director of Conservation Programs. The Daniels Foundation called again, Eleanor Hammond announced, entering the lab with her characteristic brisk energy. They're increasing their funding for your authentication workshop series. Apparently, your story has made quite an impression in the art world. Josephine smiled. There's nothing like being falsely accused of forgery to make one passionate about authentication techniques. The scandal had indeed transformed her career in unexpected ways. Her experience had been featured in a prominent art journal, and she now consulted regularly with insurance companies on fraud detection. The painful chapter of her life had paradoxically established her as a leading expert in her field. The irony isn't lost on me, she told Eleanor. Gregory tried to destroy my reputation, and instead he inadvertently enhanced it. Later that afternoon, Josephine hosted a small gathering at her home, the Victorian house she had once shared. With Gregory, now transformed with new colors and arrangements that reflected her own aesthetic rather than their compromised tastes. Raymond Okafor was there with his wife Deirdre, along with Patricia Fernandez and several colleagues from the museum. To new beginnings, Raymond toasted, raising his glass, and to the remarkable resilience of truth. As conversations flowed around her, Josephine found herself drawn to the garden, where spring bulbs were emerging in colorful profusion. She had spent weekends replanting the flower beds, finding therapy in the tactile connection with growing things. You seem contemplative, observed Deirdre Okafor, joining her on the garden bench. A psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, Deirdre had become both friend and informal counselor during the aftermath. I was just thinking about restoration, Josephine replied. In my work, we never try to make damaged art look brand new. Instead, we honor its history while stabilizing it for the future. Deirdre nodded. A good metaphor for healing. I received a letter from Gregory yesterday, Josephine continued after a moment. Not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement. He said he'd been so focused on creating the appearance of success that he lost sight of the actual good things in his life. Will you respond? Josephine shook her head. There's nothing more to say. That chapter is closed. She glanced back toward the house, where her guests were laughing over some story Raymond was animatedly telling. I'm writing a new one now. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to the museum. Dr. Julian Harwood, the renowned British authenticator whose textbooks had guided Josephine's early career, arrived unannounced at her laboratory door. Dr. Harwood, she greeted him, surprised. I had no idea you were in the country. A rather impulsive trip, he admitted, his eyes crinkling with warmth. I read your paper on detecting digital manipulation in provenance documentation. Brilliant work. I'm assembling an international task force on emerging forgery techniques, and I'd like you to consider joining us. The invitation represented an opportunity she would never have imagined possible a year earlier. Collaboration with the leading experts in her field, contributing to standards that would shape the future of art conservation. The team will meet quarterly in different locations: London, Paris, Florence, New York, Harwood explained. It would mean significant travel. I accept, Josephine responded without hesitation. That evening, as she packed for her first international conference since the divorce, Josephine paused before a small watercolor hanging in her bedroom, one of the few original artworks she and Gregory had collected together. For months, she had intended to sell it, unable to look at it without remembering their shared past. Now, she studied it with professional detachment. The painting depicted a storm-tossed ship approaching a lighthouse, waves crashing against rocky shores. Once she had seen only the peril in the image. Tonight, she noticed what the artist had emphasized through subtle use of light, not the danger, but the guidance that would lead the vessel to safety. Carefully, she removed the painting from the wall and wrapped it for donation to the museum's education department. Tomorrow, it would begin a new chapter as well, a teaching tool for students learning to distinguish authentic artistic vision from hollow imitation. Before turning out the lights, Josephine checked her calendar for the coming months: museum commitments, legal consultations, international conferences, and social engagements filled the previously empty spaces. Where there had once been a single unified path shaped by her marriage, there now existed a constellation of possibilities, each representing a choice that was entirely her own. The restoration was complete, not to what had been before, but to something more authentic than she had ever allowed herself to imagine. Like the artwork she had dedicated her life to preserving, the damage would always be part of her history. But it was the skillful integration of that damage into the whole that created something of lasting value. Outside, spring rain began to fall, gentle and cleansing. Josephine listened to its rhythm against the windows of the house that was now truly hers, not a reminder of what she had lost, but a testament to what she had reclaimed.